So at this point we have basically the pieces all cut out and matched up. All your bones are matched with all the skin materials. But as it turns out, some of these pieces are going to require a little bit of extra attention before we put it together, and that's what we're going to talk about here in this video. So I'm going to start with the stand braces, which is this part right here. There's two of them that are going to be used. We won't actually use them until we assemble things. As it turns out, we have to cut two dados in those stand braces. I'll do them both together. Notice I set the height of the blade first. That's going to be 3/8 of an inch. And what I'm going to do first is cut what I call the inside dimension. That would be that 7 13/16 dimension. And then we're going to reposition the fence so that we get the correct thickness of dado, and that would be the bone's thickness plus a 1/16 of an inch. Now I noticed when I made that cut that it kind of ripped out the wood on the back side, so I'm going to put a piece of, right there, it ripped out the wood just a little bit. It's not a big deal, but I'm going to back that with a scrap piece of wood to prevent that from happening on this cut. But this cut is actually that 7 13/16 plus the bone thickness plus a 1/16 of an inch clearance. And once we have those two cuts made in the material, then we just go back and forth ever so slightly, no more than 1/8 of an inch at a time, until we have removed the wood between those two cuts. And this is sort of your shade tree woodworker method of making a dado. Of course, you could use a dado blade if you had a dado blade. They could also be done on a router. There's hand tools that you could do this with. You get the idea, though. Now, this is exactly the same process, except I'll show you the view from my handy-dandy helmet cam, which I'm sure you've noticed at some point here. Again, we're just removing that material between the two cuts that we just made. And there you have two dados cut in the two braces. No big deal. Now we're going to repeat that process in a couple different spots. These are the 17-inch long end pieces, and they actually have two dados cut in each of them. The first one is 2 inches down, and that's a very important dimension, because if you end up using an extension shelf with these, you're going to find that has to be that way. Again, we want dado width to be the bone's thickness. I specified that way because I'm using 5/8 thick material. You might be using 1/2 inch material. We mark the inside, and then we come back and again, ever so slightly move that wood about 1/8 of an inch at a time, removing the material between the two cuts we just made. And there we have one dado. Now I happen to have one of these already made, and I'm just checking it against that. And I also want to see if the thickness is right so that that piece slides evenly. You don't have the advantage of doing that. You're going to have to use the drawing to make sure everything is right. Now once we have the top ones done, let's do the bottom ones. Same exact principle. And you can see it isn't rocket science. You just want to take your time here, pay attention to what you're doing, and I think you'll find it goes pretty simple. There we go. Now let's do that to all of them, and then we're ready to drill some holes in them. And I like to locate the holes from the dado side. We're just putting it right square in the center of the dado. And then once we have the holes located, we're going to countersink the other side. So I've used my stop on the drill press to set the depth of this countersink bit so that we don't go through too far, but it will allow the head of our wood screw to seat down below the surface of the wood. Those are the hardest parts to make on the box. Once we have those taken care of, then life is good. Now, we're going to make these stand stops. That would be these pieces. And first, we need to get them to the right size, which I think is 11 and 7/8 by, in my case, 5/8 by 5/8. And that's no real trick. We're just making some rectangular parts. But again, we're going to have to kind of make, I don't know if you'd call it a dado, you might call it something else on the end of the piece of the wood. But it's the same exact principle. We need to set the height. And again, I have one already made, so I'm just doing it from that. You're going to have to do it from the drawings. Seems like it's 5/16 high and about 7/8, I think, in. But again, just look at your drawing. That'll tell you how to do that. And notice this is going to look very, very similar to what we've been doing all along. Now, you have so many dados to make that it might make sense to put your dado blade on. I'm just showing you this way because dado blade's $50, and a lot of people don't want to have to make that purchase. You don't have to. It just takes you longer to do. Of course, if you had one, it'd only take you one swipe and you're done with it. Okay, we do both ends. We've just managed to shape that piece. I'm going to turn the saw blade off, and I like to take my sanding block and just let's smooth that out just a little bit, because that's actually where the door is going to slide in to form a shelf on the stand if we want to do that. That's one option of setting the box up. Now let's find the center of these two pieces, which can be done by picking a dimension that's very close to half of the distance. It's almost 12, so I'm going to use 6. And I get 2 marks at 6 inches from either end, and just mark between the two, and that will be the center. There are several places I specify doing that in this whole assembly process. And then we want to go 4 inches one direction from that center. And we also want to go 4 inches the other direction, 1, 2, 3, 4 inches that way. And we have located the holes in the stand stops. Now all we really have left to do is to drill and countersink some holes in the stand stops. No big deal here. Once again, we've set the height so that we don't go too far. And the only other thing I like to do is take my bench sander, smooth it out a little bit, make sure we have all the splinters off and such, just kind of round the edges. And here's a little trick that I also use on the legs of the stand. And I take and set that at a 45-degree angle, and then we can put just a little bit of a chamfer here. And as it turns out, it just ends up looking quite a bit better. I think that's probably the main reason for doing it. Now the last thing we have to do is quite simply drill 1/2-inch holes in the legs. And this is where our dowel rod's going to go for our rods and rope modification. Now, you want to use your drawing to get everything situated right. I like to use the rounded edges on the outside. And that's pretty much the whole proposition of building the special parts. We're ready to put this box together, I think.